Welcome to Little River United Church of Christ. My name is Shelley Poe. I'm the senior pastor here, and we're just so glad to have you in the space. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. So I want to turn it over now to the facilitator of our anti-racism ministry team, who's going to introduce our speaker for today.
Good afternoon. My name is Drew Nettinga, and I am one of the members of the anti-racism ministry team here at Little River. Every Sunday when we begin worship, Pastor Shelley reminds us that we strive to be an anti-racist church, and our anti-racism ministry team's call is to help us do that very thing, to move from being a church that's striving to be anti-racist to a church that is indeed anti-racist. As you can imagine, it's a long journey, but it's one that we're excited to be on. And we are delighted this afternoon that you're here, even more delighted that we can welcome Marion Dobbins to the church to talk about her wonderful, wonderful book, The Lost Black Communities of Merrifield, the Pines and Williamstown. This is an important book. This is a book that tells local history, that helps us connect to the wider history of Virginia and the United States. So Marion, we're delighted that you're here. Marion is a very busy person. She is an historian and an ethnographer. She specializes in research and public speaking, historical sessions, and ethnography. She's provided insight into Virginia and African American historical narratives to schools, universities, civic organizations, private societies, conferences, and museums. If that's not enough, Marion is also a history commissioner for Prince William County. She's an advisor on the Fairfax County Historical Commission, as well as the community historian for George Mason University Center for Mason Legacy. And in addition, she's a student in the PhD program in American and African American history at GMU. We are delighted, Marion, that you're here. We welcome you, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Believe it or not, I do sleep. There are days when I get to sleep, okay? But, you know, my history and the history of this area is just my passion. Being African American and growing up in a time when African American history was not really talked about, was not taught in schools, I would sit at my grandmother's knee and I would listen to her talk about our family, how some had been enslaved and how some had been born free. And all these things were so important to me. They were so important to me that when I was in the 4th grade, Fairfax County had this thing that you had to learn about Virginia history, right? And so my teacher said, I want each of you to go and research a topic and bring back an essay about something about Virginia history, right? Well, I'm like, this is perfect. I'm gonna go talk to my grandmother and sit at her knee, and she's gonna tell me all this stuff that I can write down. So she did. She told me about her grandmother who had been enslaved and who had lived in a cabin where the timbers were not put together well, and when the rain would come through, it would hit the dirt floor, and it would become muddy, and yada, yada, yada. And so I wrote all this down. I was so excited. Little did I know, I was like in 4th grade doing an oral history project, right? So I already knew my destiny in life, right? So I went to school, and I told the teacher, I said, I want to do my essay first, because we had to get up and give a talk. And she said, okay, Marion, well, what's it about? I said, it's about my ancestors, and they were enslaved. And she, of course, she was white, so she turned whiter than white. And the time I got to do it was they were getting ready to, the bell was getting ready to ring, the kids were putting their coats on and getting their book bags, so nobody was really listening to me. So I made a promise right then. I said, if I ever get people in a hall or someplace where I can lock the doors and make them stay, they're gonna listen to me. The other neat thing about this, well, I don't know if this is neat or not, but we're right next to Pleasant Valley, which was one of the only places that my family members could bury the dead because of segregation. So my grandmother, who I dedicated this book to, is over there. And she's here today. I know that she's happy that you all are here to hear her story. So let's start before I start crying. Okay, so we are talking about the lost Black communities of Merrifield, the Pines, and Williamstown. Now, the reason why it's Merrifield is because I grew up there. I was born and raised there. No, it's not the Mosaic. It is Merrifield, okay? And my grandmother, God rest her soul, had a 20-acre farm called the Pines. And that was situated right behind Fairfax Hospital, which now is a soccer field called Pine Ridge Park. And then she had to move to Williamstown. And Williamstown, for those of you who don't know, was at the intersection of Arlington Boulevard and Williams Drive, where Dewberry Building is, if you know where that is. Going back down in there was all Williamstown, and it was owned and created by a man named Seth Williams, who sold lots to African Americans. So, how did Merrifield get started? Well, let's look at Merrifield's history. So, where is Merrifield? Well, Merrifield was part of a 403-acre plot of land that was originally owned by Charles Lee, who was the uncle of Robert E. Lee. Now, there wasn't a plantation on it. It wasn't like the Fitzjews, Ravensworth, or anything like that. It was just barren land by 1860. It had been given to Mary E. Lee Gassel, who was Charles Lee's widow, when he died. So she got those 403 acres through his death, right? But by 1860, she is dead. She's remarried. She dies after she remarries, and then the land goes into trust. And then after the Civil War, there was a wonderful man by the name of Robert Porter, who had been a retired Union officer from New York, who came down here because of the war and said, wow, Fairfax County's got some cheap land here. The soil's not very good because they killed it with tobacco, but I know how to fix that. I know how I'm gonna make some money. I will learn one day, right? Wrong way? Okay, now we got it. Okay, so Merrifield, the way it looks now, if you know where the Silver Diner is at Gallus Road and Porter Road, right? So where I said the little, see if I can get it. You can't see it on there. But see where it says Merrifield Colored School? To your left, that white building is the Silver Diner. To your right is the hotel. Right in between those parking lots is where the Merrifield Colored School was, okay? Porter Road, guess why it was named Porter Road? Robert Porter, right? Because he owned all that land. And if you go on the other side of Porter Road, you'll see First Baptist Church of Merrifield, that little triangle, and then the circle is Marion. That's where I grew up. Right next to the church, right across the street from the Merrifield Colored School. This is the way Merrifield looked in 1960, right? I was born in 1959. So you still have Gallus Road, you have Porter Road, but you can see how rural it is. You've got the colored schoolhouse is still there, and it's still across the street from where Marion lives. And the old First Baptist Church is there, that triangle, and next to it is another little box where they're beginning to build the new church. So Robert Porter, like I said, he came from New York, right? He had been a captain in the Union Army, and he and his brother-in-law decide that, you know what, we're gonna buy like 300 acres in Merrifield, and we're gonna start selling it to African Americans, right? We buy this land cheap. Maybe we'll buy it for $1, $2 an acre, and then we'll flip it to freedmen at $10 an acre. It was like the first land flips, right? So why did African Americans want land after they got their freedom? Because there were three things that they felt that they needed. They needed to have land that would make them seem like they were real citizens. They wanted education, because as of 1831 and Nat Turner's rebellion, Virginia said that even if you were free or enslaved, you were not allowed to be taught to read or write. That was the law. So by 1863, with the Emancipation Proclamation, 98% of all free people were illiterate. So they wanted land, they wanted their schools, and they wanted their churches. Why their churches? because they were tired of being sent to churches where a minister would get up and say, you need to be a good slave to your master. It says it right here in the Bible. They wanted bone of their bone and flesh of their flesh, and that's their quote. And what that meant was they wanted someone that looked like them to get in the pulpit and preach to them about life. And those are the three things that you will find in the Merrifield community. Now, Merrifield is the beginning, and it is the offsprings of that are the Pines, and the offspring of that is Williamstown. Well, Merrifield was not always called Merrifield. It was called Mills Crossroads, because there was all kinds of mills around here. As a matter of fact, the Gooding family had a mill. They also had a blacksmith named Benjamin. And when he got his freedom, I'm hoping, I haven't done full research, but I'm hoping he was able to use his skills as a blacksmith to provide for his family. So the Goodings had a grist mill. We know the Chichesters had a grist mill. So probably Mills Crossroads was because there were so many mills in this area. And if you look at the map here, you will see where it says Mills Crossroads, Merrifield. So on your right-hand side, right below Merrifield, are all the African Americans that first bought land in Merrifield. We have Charles Tinner, who bought 5 acres, Robert Bradley, 4.5, Richard Blaine, 6 acres. The colored school is there. John Coates, who was born free, actually, 5 acres. Wesley Gibson was the son of Horace Gibson, who was the blacksmith that had a shop here in Ilda, he and his partner, Moses Parker. But he buys land in Merrifield, and he gives that land to his son, Wesley Gibson, and Wesley lives there until he moves to DC. We have Nimrod Dixon, who has 2 acres, a person by the name of Gaskins, and then Joshua Ball, who has 5 acres. All of those are right on the right-hand side of what is Gallus Road, in that little corridor. Now, some of it later on goes down Lee Highway, like you're going towards Falls Church or Arlington. There's spots in there called the gravel banks and things like that. They're also black communities, but they're all considered Merrifield. But that's how Merrifield is starting. And they're buying this land about 1874 is the first real deed that Joshua Ball and Joshua Pearson create. So who's Nimrod Dixon? And how did these people get the money to be able to buy land in Merrifield? Well, Nimrod Dixon, you saw, he bought land, right? He had acres in Merrifield. But I found this from the Freedmen's Bureau, that he was living in 1866, March 1st. He was living in Alexandria in part of the Freedmen's Village. And they had a program where you could go and you could rent land from the Freedmen's Bureau, and you could farm it. And then you could farm it, and the rent for that land was $75 a year. So once you farmed, you sold your produce, because you're right there at DC where the markets are, right? And Alexandria market. So you sell your produce or whatever you're growing. You pay your $75 off for the year. Then whatever you have left over, you use for your own family. So what did I say they wanted? They wanted land, they wanted churches, and they wanted education, schools. So what does Nimrod Dixon do? I believe he uses that money to buy the land that he bought in Merrifield. And I talked about churches, right? So after they buy land, right, they want to start a church. Well, the First Baptist Church of Merrifield had already been started. It had been kind of an offshoot from Second Baptist Church in Falls Church, if you know where that is. And if you know where James Lee Community Center is, anybody know it? Raise your hands if you know where that is. I'll let you know, that is my great-great-grandfather. Yeah, and he helped start Second Baptist. So Merrifield, the people that created First Baptist of Merrifield were part of that Second Baptist area. They broke off of there and started worshiping in a cabin on Graham Road. And from Graham Road, they bought property in Merrifield. And by 1894, they had created a church. But you'll see some of the similar names that were getting the property first, right? We have Joshua Ball, Joshua Pearson, John Coates, Nimrod Dixon, and then we have William Stewart. Those are the first trustees that started the First Baptist Church of Merrifield. You see that church? It had no indoor plumbing. Nope, we didn't have a bathroom. It was heated by a potbelly stove. I grew up in that church. I love that church. Next to that church is Edith Collins Terry's house, and on the back side of her house, where you see all the sky and the wonderful trees or whatever, but it's wintertime, that's your mosaic. Imagine that. That is the mosaic. And that the yellow says Porter Road. That is the dirt Porter Road that I lived on. So we have First Baptist Church in Merrifield. So they started the old church in 1894. In the picture on your left-hand side, the black and white, it says 1958, because the parishioners decided they wanted a church that would have bathrooms, that would have classrooms, that would have an auditorium, because if they had any type of events like big banquets or whatever, if the weather was good, you know, all that was done outside, right? So they wanted something a little bit more accommodating. But if you notice, the black and white picture, I have a red square around it. That is the foundation basement of the First Baptist Church in Merrifield. And that stayed like that for 10 years, 9 to 10 years. And what they used that for was a fellowship hall, and there were also bathrooms in there. So they didn't have a sanctuary because they wanted to raise enough money so they didn't have a mortgage. And the way they raised mortgage was they had pound parties where you bring a pound of something and I bring a pound of something and we can sell it or we can donate it. Or they had apron fundraisers where you bring an apron, try to fill it with as much money as you can. Or they had buy a brick program. Anything they could do to be able to build this church. But not only that, the African Americans in that community used their talents to build that church. My father, who used to build before World War II, I know I'm really dating my age, right? Before World War II, he built swimming pools off of Fox Mill Road in Washington, D.C. So he was a builder. He was a carpenter. He knew how to do cement work. So he helped build this church, the new church that we're talking about. And the other members, they were bricklayers, anything that they could do. They were painters. They brought all of their talents and wisdom into building this church. One of the things that they did inside the church was they had pageants and they had plays. So this is inside of the Merrifield Church that was built in 1894. I don't know of anybody else that has pictures of the inside of this church. So I'm very thankful that one of my neighbors was able to give me these pictures. And this is a play called Heaven's Gate. And what it is the parishioners or whoever was in the play would be coming down the front row trying to get to that white gate, which was trying to get into heaven. But the thing is, there's Satan, right? And Satan's following them all the way up to the gates, and he's trying to convince them with wine and whatever, you know, come on, you don't need to do that. We'll have a better life on this side. But most of them, I can say all of them, decided to go through the gate, and they all went up to heaven. If you see the gentleman playing on the piano, his name is Guy V. Collins, and we're going to talk about the Collins in a bit in the Pines. But Guy is also connected to Mount Calvary, which I know you all have done some things with Mount Calvary in Fairfax County. Have you? Yeah. Did you do that? No? Okay. But he was also a musician. He could play anything. In his house in the Pines, he had a full-size harp. He had a grand Steinway piano, which every relative that he knew had to go to his house and take piano lessons. Yeah, I wanted ballet, but what did I get? Piano lessons. But anyway, and he played the violin. He had a bass. He had a cello. Everything. He was also supposedly, I'm still researching this, but the first choir director of an interracial choir for Fairfax County. Other pictures. This is a youth choir still in the old church. It is also the pastor's 21st anniversary. So you'll see that, you know, the church was small, but we were proud people of it. It started in 1894, and that church still stood until about 1981 or 82 when, unfortunately, they tore it down. This was a proud moment in 1966. So this is the inside of the new church. So the black and white picture is Reverend C.L. Parker, who was the minister that was there from the 1930s until 1970s. And he actually was the one that baptized me. And he's walking into the new church, and they are so proud of this new church. And in the middle is a wedding that they have at the church. And interesting, if you notice, the picture in the middle and the picture on the end, the pews are different. Well, the pews in the middle are from the old church. So they didn't have pews yet, so they used the old church pews. And then they got in the new pews and put those in. So the old pews was donated to another church. I think it was Chesterbrook near Reston. Another picture of, this was the fellowship hall, because this is one of the things that they wanted. They wanted a place where they could fellowship. So this is the part of the church that was built and lasted for about 10 years. If you notice, there's a Pepsi machine out there too, right? Well, I lived right next to the church. And you know, when Glen Echo decided to desegregate, because it was segregated, right? I couldn't go there as a kid until they desegregated. They had this promotion that with every bottle cap you brought to Glen Echo, I think on a Monday or Tuesday or something like that, you get a free ticket. I had a Pepsi machine in my backyard. And I had a key to the church, and I'd go over there and I'd get those caps, and we would take them to Glen Echo, and we would have so many tickets till we would just give them away, because we could, you know, how many rides can you get on with a pack of tickets like this, right? So we did that. Now, I wasn't stealing. Pastor, I wasn't stealing. My dad said he was digging. He was chairman of the digging board. He said I could go get the caps, and, you know, so that was good. But we had a great time, and we helped other people with our many tickets. These are the leaders that helped get Merrifield into the next generation. So we passed those who were freedmen, who are now who first bought land. These are the next generation. These are my generation. You have Freddie Ransell, that's my father. You have Clarence Gibson next to him. Clarence Gibson was the grandson of Horace Gibson. Wesley Gibson was his father. And I don't know, do you all know about Horace Gibson and Ilda? Do many of you know about Ilda? Well, Ilda, if you don't know, Ilda was a community that was built by African Americans, Horace Gibson and Mosby Parker. They were blacksmiths, and they came here to the Little River Turnpike, Prosperity Avenue kind of area, and they had a blacksmith shop because they were blacksmiths, right? But Horace Gibson was also buying land in Merrifield. So Ilda and Merrifield were kind of interchanged as far as communities went. So if you've read Ton Shoup's book about Ilda, Merrifield is very connected to that community. The others are Reverend C.L. Parker in the center. That's the pastor that baptized me, Reverend Terry. Vernon Ransell was my uncle. That's Freddie Ransell's brother. And Samuel Pearson in the back. And the Pearsons were a very prominent family in Burke. And that's another book that I'm working on. So this is about Ilda. So if you'll see, that's the historic marker of Ilda. And if you go up here on Little River Turnpike, like you're going towards Fairfax Circle, you're gonna see on your left-hand side the Ilda historical marker. It's right there at Little River Turnpike and Guinea Road, right? And that's the area where it was. In the middle is a woman called Viola Johnson Richardson. And Ms. Johnson was a resident of Ilda. She was also a member of First Baptist Church of Merrifield, and she was my mother's best friend. So you see the intersection between Ilda and Merrifield. How did Viola Richardson get to be in Ilda? Well, that newspaper clipping is about her grandmother. Her grandmother was Catherine Johnson, and she had been enslaved in Goochland, and her father was her enslaver. And after the war, she came up here, and she started working, and then there was another little war that broke out. It was called the Spanish-American War. And for you all that don't know, Merrifield had over 20,000 soldiers in the Dunlorne-Merrifield area preparing to go to war for the Spanish-American War. So what Catherine did was she started doing their laundry, right? Smart woman. Raised enough money to buy about 30 acres of land right around here. And there was a white building, a white house, I don't know if it's still there now, that's right next to what was the Pine Ridge Elementary School, which is now the Police Department Academy. That was their home. Like I said, we just couldn't go anywhere, right? Things were segregated, even in my time. So in the early 60s, what did we do? Well, the church would always have an annual day out. This was our vacation. I mean, it wasn't like, it's spring break and we're gonna go away to, Florida for a weekend. No. So what are we gonna do? Well, the church always had that one special weekend, that one special Saturday when we're gonna go north to the beach. And where we're gonna go is either Atlantic City, or we're gonna go to Wildwood or Asbury Park, or we'll go to Sparrows Beach. Sparrows Beach was in Annapolis, and it was owned by an African-American woman. And she and her sister had a beach. One was Carl's Beach, and one was Sparrows. Sparrows Beach was where the church people went, and the family. Carl's Beach is where you went to party. Right? So I never got a chance to go to Carl's Beach, but I went to Sparrows Beach, and we had a great time there. In the middle, you'll see some of my cousins, they're laying on the beach, and if you notice, it's all black people there, and the picture of the gentleman in the swim shorts, that's my grandfather, Avon Lee, who was the grandson of James Lee. On the other side, the picnic picture is because that's how we entertained ourselves. If we weren't on that one-day excursion and we decided that we wanted to, or the elders or my mother and father wanted to take a drive to the country and we wanted to go to Manassas or Leesburg, right? That was country for us. But we knew there's no place for us to stop. Where we're going to eat? So what we did was we packed our picnic basket, fried chicken, watermelon, boiled eggs. And they become stereotypical of the African-American culture, but it's deeper than that. It's not just because we like that kind of food. It was sustainability. It was the only way that we could have food to take with us to go on picnics, to do things that the average person was doing. Because whether you believe it or not, even though this is a very diverse area now, and God bless you all for what you're doing for, to ward off racism, Fairfax County was a very racist area and very segregated. And that's another reason why I'm here standing to let people know of the history. So if you're on Gallus Road, and you know where that McDonald's is? On Gallus Road, right across from Luther Jackson Intermediate School. Behind it was a house, and that's George Heison's house. And I put that there because I wanted you to see the kind of homes that were in Merrifield. These were not people who didn't have. They weren't rich, but they weren't poor. They had sustainability because most of them were farmers. And how did they sustain their lives? Well, they would grow their crops, and they would grow enough to feed their family. They'd grow enough in the summer so then they could put in the root cellar for the winter. Well, whatever they had left over, what would they do with it? Sell it, because they're so close to Washington, D.C. And that became a term. They became what we call truck farmers. So that's how the next generation is continuing generational wealth. They own their own property, right? They've got their churches. They've got their pseudo schools. I guess you could talk about it because we're going to talk about it later. But they are trying to carve out a good life in an institution that doesn't want them to have it. The other thing with the church is that when they bought the land, Robert Bradley, who was African-American, who lived in Merrifield, who sold the church their property, put in the deed that you could not have a cemetery on church grounds. Now, I don't know why he did that. I guess maybe because he lived in Merrifield, too, and he didn't want to be around a cemetery. I don't know. But he put that in there. So there was no place for African-Americans to bury until you get Pleasant Valley, right? So what do? Well, in this area called the Pines, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, one of the landowners, African-American, Richard Slaughter, donated an acre of land and they created the Sons and Daughters of Liberty Lodge Cemetery. And that cemetery is in that park, Pine Ridge Park. And I'll go into this a little bit more, but the cemetery laid at waste for decades because of how the county got that property. So for decades, we could not go into that cemetery and visit our elders. Eventually, the county did what it needed to do. We can go in there now, but this is another offshoot of the church, was in the Pines, is where our family cemetery was. Now, why the Sons and Daughters of Liberty Lodge? Well, African Americans, right after the Civil War, right after the end of Reconstruction, needed places that they could go if they needed money to bury their dead, or if your spouse was sick and you needed money for medicine. You needed to have association or organizations that would help you. So one of them was Odd Fellows, right? The other one was the Sons and Daughters of Liberty Lodge in Merrifield. Both of those were in Merrifield. Another larger one was the Northern Virginia Baptist Association. And what that is it's about 100+ black churches, Baptist black churches in the Northern Virginia area. And that association was started in 1877, and it was to help the African American communities all around here. And they have records from 1877 when they first started. So my next project is I'm going into those archives, and I'm gonna start looking up all that, and I'm doing some oral histories on their elders, and create a document and a website where people can go and learn more about this wonderful history of the associations that helped African Americans during Reconstruction and post. So this is, it's probably hard to see, but this is a map drawn by my aunt, Avenjeanette Lee Hill. Now, Avenjeanette grew up in the Pines, but then she moved to Spicewood Drive in Annandale, which is right off of Bannerwood Drive, near Ankatink River, or stream, or whatever they call it now. And you all know where, if you're on Prosperity, you go over that little bridge, right? Well, it used to be a one-way bridge, and it used to have wood coming up. I remember that. But that part of that creek is where they would baptize people. So my mother, in the 1920s, was taken down in the winter. Why in the winter? I don't know. But they would break the ice, and they would baptize people, and they'd go back to church and celebrate. Nobody ever got sick. I wonder why, right? That is holy water right there. Nobody's going to get sick. So if you look at that map, the arrow's pointing to where the Liberty Lodge would have been. And that's who created the Liberty Lodge Cemetery. And that is right at the corner of where the Silver Diner is right now. And it's right at the corner of Gallus Road and Porter. The other arrows, red arrows are where the school was, the church, and then where I grew up. So all those circles are the same places that you saw in the other map. The only thing different is where Liberty Lodge was. You see that vast open space? I don't know if you can read it. It says a ball field. That's where they played baseball. And it was almost like sand lot. I mean, this was another thing that the black community did. They played baseball, and they played horseshoes, and they sang, and they did other things that were part of being a community. So the Odd Fellows Hall I talked about. Anybody know where Boyd's Piano used to be at Gallus Road? Yeah? That was the Odd Fellows Hall. It was built in 1917. The Liberty Lodge was built in 1907. Then they built this one in 1917. And it wasn't always Boyd's Piano. It was the lodge, but what it did was, it was also an overflow schoolhouse. So when the first schoolhouse in Merrifield, the one-room schoolhouse, which I'm going to show you a picture of, got overcrowded, they used that building, the Odd Fellows Hall, which became Boyd's Piano, as a school. It also was a theater. So on the weekends, there was an African American in the Merrifield area that had a projector, and somehow he got some film. And periodically, they would have their own movie theater there, popcorn and everything else, because where else were they going to go? I mean, when I was growing up, the State Theater that's in Falls Church, segregated. And then when you could go in it, African Americans had to go up the side steps to the balcony. Now, there was an eatery in Merrifield. It was called Harvey's Diner. Now, Harvey's Diner also sold tobacco, they sold merchandise, they sold food, and it was right at the corner of Lee Highway and Gallus Road, where those of you who have been here around a long time know where Jack in the Box used to be. Do you know where that is? Across the street from Merrifield Garden Center, right at that corner. That was where Harry's restaurant was. But if you were African American, you could not go in there and eat. You could go to the back door, and you could possibly buy a hamburger if they felt good. But as an African American, you couldn't go through the front door. Now, if you were white, even if you had your dog, you could go through the front door and let your dog sit in there while you ate. But if you were black, you could not go in. So this is the Merrifield Colored School that I showed you on the map that was across the street from where I lived. This was a one-room schoolhouse. It had no indoor plumbing. It had no janitorial service. It had no heat. So my mother went to this school. She had a 7th grade education. She walked 2 miles to school and 2 miles back. And she said when she would walk to the Merrifield School, right there near where the mosaic is, her hands would be so frozen that the teacher would have a warm basin of water that you put your hands in to kind of get them unfrozen. And the boys that went to the school, they would have to chop the wood before the other students got there because they had to start stoking the fire, right? But the sad thing about this is this school wasn't built until 1898. In 1870, Virginia passed a law that said every school-aged children will have an education. Well, it's kind of hard if you don't have a school. Now, by 1877, Merrifield had a white school, but they did not get their own black school until 1898. Do the math, right? And if you notice, I'm on the tricycle. Don't I look cute? And in the background is the school that my mother went to. It was still there in the 60s. It was still there. It was not a school anymore. The school board sold it in 1960, and it became a residential area, a residential home, even though it didn't have indoor plumbing or indoor heating. But I used to go in there and play. I played in my mother's one-room schoolhouse, right? How many people do you know that could say that? So where did the Merrifield kids go? Well, Falls Church had an African-American 2-room schoolhouse. And the land was donated by James Lee. And the Merrifield students were registered in 1890. William Collins and John Coates registered their children to go to school. So their children went from Merrifield to Falls Church. And the school was right behind what is now James Lee Community Center. That's James Lee. Tell you a little bit about James Lee. James Lee's my great-great-grandfather. He was born in 1843. He was born free. Why was he born free? Because his mother was born in 1823, and she was born free. Why was she born free? Because her mother, who was born in 1800, was born free. How'd her mother get born free? Well, there was a gentleman by the name of Robert Carter III. His grandfather, they called him King Carter, owned like 600,000 acres in Virginia. I mean, he was one of the largest landowners right up there with Fitzhugh Plantation. And after the Revolutionary War, Robert Carter III, who had over 400 enslaved people, had an epiphany. He said, you know, maybe it's not so cool. Maybe it's not right that we are holding other people in bondage. So he gave them gradual freedom, gradual manumission. So in some of it, it said, when you reach the age of 21, you will be free. Or when you reach the age of 18, you will be free. So he freed all 400 of his enslaved people. One of those people, I believe, was my great-great-great-great-grandmother. because Lucy Lee was born in 1800 and she was born free, and that was James Lee's grandmother. And the way that she's born free is because her mother was free. So the law says that if your mother's free, you're free when you're born. If your mother's enslaved when you're born, you're enslaved. So we have the woman that I think is my relative that was given her freedom by Robert Carter III, who had her freedom and then had Lucy Lee, 1800. Lucy had a daughter, Betsy Lee, in 1823, and Betsy had a son, James Lee, in 1843, and that is my great-great-grandfather. So this is, you know, I think it's the book Two Cities or something by Mark Twain or one of those people. I'm not very good on that. Tale of Two Cities, there you go, I'm trying to think of that. Well, I have Tale of Two Schools. So on one side, you have the Merrifield Colored School, 1938, and on the other, you have Dunlorne Elementary School, 1938. Both built the same year. So that one schoolhouse, one-room schoolhouse that my mom went to was too small. So they decided, after much prodding by the African-American community, to build a bigger school in Merrifield. So they put up a referendum, and they decided to build another school in Dunlorne for the white students. They appropriated $50,000 to build the white school. The white school is all brick. It has indoor plumbing. It has an auditorium that'll seat 250 students. It has classrooms, has janitorial service, it has electricity, it has all the things that your students would need so they could learn and grow and create a great life for themselves, right? Well, in Merrifield, they appropriated $3,500. 2 rooms, wood, still heated by wood, no indoor plumbing, still using the outhouse. So that is the disparity between education. And still, Fairfax County had no high school for its African-American students. The highest grade level you could get was 7th grade until 1954, 56, when they opened up Luther Jackson High School. So with that 2-room schoolhouse in Merrifield, they did in 1938-39, Fairfax County decided to buy part of the Manassas Industrial School for Colored Youth and change it to the Manassas Regional High School. Now, have any of you all ever heard of the Manassas Industrial School for Colored Youth? No? Let me tell you. So the Manassas Industrial School for Colored Youth was the brainchild of a wonderful woman named Jenny Dean. And Jenny Dean lived in Manassas, right, in the Prince William County, lived in the Prince William County area. She had been enslaved. She actually lived right near the battlefield. She heard those cannons. She saw the dead bodies, both Union and Confederate. Her father helped bury the graves up for both sides. When she got her freedom, her father had his freedom too with emancipation, and they bought a farm, but the father died. And so she, to be able to keep the farm in Prince William County, would take the train from the Manassas Depot, you know, the one that they blew up in the Civil War. It was repaired, and she would go into Washington City, which is Washington, D.C., and she did laundry. And she noticed when she was there that the African Americans in the city had no skill set. They weren't being taught. They didn't have any skills. They weren't going to school. And so she'd come back to Prince William, and she would see the same thing in her own neighborhood. And she was a very devout missionary. On weekends, when she would come back from D.C., she opened up Sabbath schools. She taught children. She taught women how to sew, how to do laundry, so then they could go out and make money to take care of their families. But she said, that's not enough. I need to do something else. We need a school for higher education. 7th grade is not enough. So she went to the community and she said, if you go and bring me your students, I will get the money and I will build a church. I will build this school. And the school opened in 1894 in Prince William County near Manassas City, and it was called the Manassas Industrial School for Colored Youth. Do you want to know who gave the keynote address in Manassas to open that school up in 1894? Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass got on the train from Washington City, came all the way up to Manassas. She met him at the depot, and they walked up the hill, and they opened up the school. And that school educated 6,000 African-American children and young adults who would not have had an opportunity to go to school in higher levels. This was this woman's vision. She had a first-grade education, but you know the other thing she had? She had God. And she believed that God would help her. She was so incredible. This woman got Andrew Carnegie to give her $20,000 to help build one of the buildings on her campus. She spoke at one of the women's suffragette conferences in DC. She was fearless, and she's my shero. When I think about her, when I think I can't do something, I'm like, you know, I'm like 65 years old, sitting next to 20-some-year-olds that are trying to get their PhD, and I'm like, I can't do this. I'm like, wait a minute, yes I can. If Jenny Dean, who had a first-grade education, could start a school and get Frederick Douglass to come and open it up for her, right? I can do anything. The picture there, that beautiful woman, is Avon Jeanette Lee Hill, and that's that little girl that was in front of that picture in Merrifield. Now she's in high school, and she is now the Manassas homecoming queen. And because she was Manassas homecoming queen, they had Mary Cloud Bethune come and give an opening address at homecoming, and because she was the queen, she got to give flowers to Mary Cloud Bethune. The other picture, that's her and her sister in the Pines. The other picture are bench seat buses, and this is the kind of buses that they use for the African-American students. The seats faced each other, right? And so you're talking every black child in Northern Virginia during this time is going to Manassas. That's the only high school. If you lived in Fairfax, Prince William County, Rappahannock County, Wade County, any of these counties around here, that's the school you're going, that's your high school. So from Merrifield, it took my aunt, Avon Jeanette Hill, 2 hours to get to to get to Manassas to go to school, and 2 hours to come back. And in the summer, because there's no air conditioning on the bus, hopefully the bus didn't break down, because that happened a lot, because these are secondhand buses, right? They would take the windows down, and the roads were still dirt. So they're going along for 2 hours in a bus with the windows down, and what's coming in? Dust and dirt. So by the time they got to school, they were dusty and dirty. And needless to say, the same way back. But in 1954, 1955, finally, Fairfax County decides that they are going to build a high school for African-American students. And there were people like Reverend Sherman Phillips, Reverend Shepherd. These are all people, the ministers of the community, which were very activist, demanding that you've got to give African-American students a high school. And so they did. But when it first opened, most people don't know, it was grade 1 through 12. It was not just a high school. So this is a picture of the elementary school, March 1955. And if you could see that little blue arrow of the child in the back, the girl in the back, that's my cousin. And she was in that class. So let's talk about the Pines, right? So now we've got Merrifield. We've got the schools there. We've got the church. They've got land. So in 1905, another person who's living around that Merrifield area was William Collins, Jr. And in 1905, he bought land and created what we call the Pines. It was about a 20-acre complex of the Collins family and some other African Americans from the community. And they were farmers, and they lived well. They took care of themselves. They didn't ask anybody for anything. As a matter of fact, when a lot of the poor whites couldn't feed their families, the Collins fed them. And the little white dot that's on the screen in between the black square, that's where the Liberty Lodge Cemetery was. So how did William Collins get money to be able to buy land in what we call the Pines near Merrifield? Well, this picture on the back of it says, after the Battle of Santiago Bay, 1898, William Collins Jr. So William Collins Jr. was a soldier. He was a Buffalo soldier. He had joined the Army and was in the West fighting Native Americans, and then in 1898, the war broke out with the Spanish-American War. He came and he was part of that. If you ever heard of Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders and how they went up San Juan Hill, well, my great-great-grandfather, William Collins Jr., was the one, and his troop was the one that saved Teddy Roosevelt from getting beat up that hill. You've heard of the Buffalo soldiers who, because they knew how to fight, because they've been fighting Indians and using Native American whoops and calls and things like that, they were able to defeat the enemy that was on San Juan Hill. So they basically saved Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. So you know what Teddy Roosevelt did to show his appreciation? So they took a picture. So Teddy Roosevelt's in the middle, and on one side are his white Rough Riders, and on the other side are the Buffalo soldiers. And they take the picture, and it's great. But when they publish the picture, it's Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. No one talked about the Buffalo soldiers. But my ancestor was part of that. And it's from the money that he got from being in the Army that he used to buy land in what they call the Mason Tract, which is right on the other side of this area, right behind Fairfax Hospital. So 3 generations lived there. We have William Collins Sr. William Collins Sr. fought in the Civil War. He was also instrumental in helping to build Merrifield and First Baptist Church. He came to live with his son, William Collins Jr., who bought the property that created the Pines. And they call it the Pines because why? Why do you think? There were pine trees, so they called it the Pines. Because William Collins, this was nothing but you know, probably the worst dirt that you could farm in. It was rocky, it was, clayey, it was, tall pine trees. So they had to cut all that down to create a community and to create roads to go back in there so other people could even buy property to create their farms. In the middle is William Collins Jr. This is him probably in the 1940s. And like I said, he's the one that brought the property that created the Pines. Next to it is his daughter, Myra Collins Lee, and that is my grandmother. And when William Collins Jr. died, he gave his land, his children inherited his land in the Pines. And he told them, he said, do not ever sell this property. He didn't know that, but having property like that being inherited is how you create generational wealth, right? Well, guess what? In 1965, after, we've got the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, and then we've got the Civil Rights Movement, and, black people want to desegregate the schools, and the white officials in Fairfax County are not really happy about this. So what many scholars at George Mason University have researched is that it was a systematic way of dismantling the African American communities in this area. And one of them was the Pines. So they came to my grandmother and the other siblings that had inherited the land from their father, William Collins Jr., and they said, you have 60 days to get out. Get your stuff, get out, 60 days, because we are going to build a school here. You all want to desegregate? Well, we need more schools, so get out. This property was given to my grandmother by her father, who said, never sell the property. They farmed there, they lived there, they asked no one for anything. They were self-sufficient. So here they are in their 60s, my grandmother and her husband, Avon Lee. They're in their 60s. Now they've got to get a mortgage, and they got to find a place to live. Where are they going to live in Fairfax County when you have red line districts? For those who are young, red line meant that no blacks go through this red line neighborhood. You've got covenants that says you cannot sell your property or give your property in inheritance to an African American. Where do they go? They get a mortgage, and then they move to Williamstown. But the people in Merrifield, how did that go away? Well, Fairfax County came to them and said, you need to clean your act up. You need to get some gutters, and you need to have a paved street. And for those who don't have indoor plumbing, you need to have indoor plumbing, or we're going to use our new laws called sanitation and blight laws, right? Well, African Americans, the ones who didn't have indoor plumbing, they didn't have the money to put indoor plumbing in. So they'd go to the bank and they'd say, I need to get this because if I don't, they're going to condemn my property and take it. And the bank would say, do you have street lights? Do you have a paved street? Do you have gutters? And they're like, no, I need to, we need to get all this. So then the county will, and they said, we can't give you the loan. Well, you knew they weren't going to give you the loan anyway because of the color of your skin. So then the county would say, well, you haven't done whatever you need to do, so, we're going to condemn your property. But then land speculators come along, right? And they're like, Merrifield is 7 miles from the nation's capital, right? We're going to buy this land, and then we're going to create businesses. And for a while, Merrifield, between the 1980s, 1990s, was really blight, very blight. When African Americans left, the whole community just caved in. The only thing left was the church and Boyd's piano. Everything else were tow truck places and welding shops and whatever. So this grandiose idea of let's take this land to make it better, didn't work out until the Mosaic. And now we have the Mosaic, which is almost a destination. And one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I got tired of people saying, did black people live in Merrifield? Yes, black people live. I lived in Merrifield. I love to go to the Mosaic, to the farmer's market, and I'm saying, I remember this was a dairy farm. A dairy farm? Yeah, it was. Yeah. Across the street, I lived across there. And people are just floored because they don't know. And so one of the reasons we do history is because if we don't know, we tend to repeat things that aren't so good, right? So we have to get the word out. The African Americans in this community, they weren't looking for handouts. They had their own schools. They had their own churches. They had their own property. They farmed. They took care of their family. And it wasn't until racism came in and took property that all that generational wealth left. That property in the Pines, right behind Fairfax Hospital, in the 1990s was worth $45 million. Do the math, what it is now. Now, the other thing Fairfax County said it would take care of the cemetery, and they never did it. It wasn't until decades later that they came, after much pressure from relatives like Jesse Wright and other relatives, that said, no, you need to do what you promised. And they finally did what they did, but by that time, the cemetery had been decimated. People had just defamed the tombstones. So they brought in the Smithsonian and they did tomography to find the graves. And the only tombstone that was really left was my great-great-grandmother's tombstone. Very sad. So this is the historical marker that we put up at the Pines. That was a great day because it finally gave validation to this was a space where African Americans created a community where they thrived and where they lived. And now what we're doing is, by help of some of the community who said, that's not enough, that sign there, we need something else, that got the Park Authority to agree to make what we call a roadside marker, which will be a flat marker that'll have pictures on it. And it will tell the story, a true story, of the people that lived there and what happened. And that will be at the mouth of where most of the athletic field is, so people will be able to see that. So Williamstown was created by the gentleman in the middle. That is Seth Williams. And Seth Williams was born in Fauquier County, married in Fauquier County, heard that there was land down here, and he bought land. And he bought 15 acres, which is now where the Dewberry office buildings are. And I think Inova has a center there too on Williams Drive. So all that land was owned by an African American. And he started selling property in like the late 1939, 1940-ish. Because African Americans, I don't know, it's just history that we seem to get always displaced with our land, right? So even with Freedmen's Bureau at Arlington House, General Lee's house, that was Freedmen's Village until they decided, no, we're not going to let African Americans stay here anymore. Get out. So those freedmen had to go to the eastern part of Arlington County, and they created a community there. Well, then in the 1930-ish, they said, oh, no, you got to go because we're building the Pentagon. So we're going to take your land. So there again, they pushed those people out. So some of those people then came up to Williamstown and bought land from Seth Williams. And Seth Williams was an amazing man. He had a first-grade education, but he could build anything. He also helped to put the steeple and the bell in the church at Merrifield. He remodeled the church. He would sell land to people and then build a house for them. So this is just a picture of Williamstown. 2024, you got the Dewberry, and we're on the bottom. It says where Myra and Avon Lee's house is. That house is the only house left in Williamstown. It's been remodeled, but is the only one left. Every other house has been destroyed. Why did they move? Why did they sell? Because they were tired of having dirt roads. They were tired of not having gutters, not having street lights. And somebody like Dewberry comes along and says, here, let me give you some money. And redlining has been gotten rid of, and covenants are no longer really present. So then you can start moving into other neighborhoods that have the things that you didn't have in your black neighborhood, so they sold. In 1950, these are the names of some of the people that lived in Williamstown. I know some of the Whitneys were some of the ones that came up from Arlington that bought property up here after the land was confiscated for the Pentagon. These are some of the houses in Williamstown. You'll see Seth Williams' house. Interesting about Seth Williams' house, he had a house there before and somebody was mad at him and burned it down. So where the house is now, where it was then, was his chicken coop. So he said, okay, well, I'm just gonna move in the chicken coop and then I'm gonna build a bigger house, and that's the house that you have here. Very resourceful man. And the other houses, this was the community. This wasn't poverty, this wasn't blight. This was actual racism to really dismantle many of these communities. This is the house that my grandmother and my grandfather bought in Williamstown in 1966. It's a nice house. It was 2 stories. It had a fireplace. It had almost an acre of land, but it wasn't home. It wasn't given to her by her father. It was bought on a mortgage. At 60-some years old, my grandfather had to go back to work to be able to sustain life because they took property that they never built a school for. And you know what they did to decimate the land that was owned by my grandmother and her siblings? When they built Mobile Center, they took all that excess dirt and put it over there on my grandmother's farm. Yeah. So this was life in the Pines. That's my grandmother's house. Those are some of my cousins that are probably being forced to get the snow off the road. But it was a community. They weren't poor. They took care of themselves. And this is my grandmother's grave. Who's over there? Who I wrote this book for. Because I want her to know that people know that the Pines existed and how it existed and what they did to make a world for themselves in a world that didn't really want them there. And so with that, I'm done. I will say, buy the book, because what I talked about is not really in the book. The pictures are not in the book. There are other pictures in the book and other stories. So,
thank you so much, Marion. It's just a wonderful history that you've shared. It's a very personal history, and we are blessed that you've shared that with us. I'm sure that there are questions that some of you may have. So.
Thank you, and that was wonderful, really wonderful. It touched our hearts. There's a cemetery, we're neighbors, and there's a cemetery along the road coming into the church that we've watched over the years, and it is Gooding. Mm-hmm. Is that the Gooding that you were talking about?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yeah. They owned a grist mill and they had a plantation and they were enslavers.
Oh,
Actually, they have a beautiful, what would you say, signage out here that shows the Gooding Cemetery and where the enslaved were buried on the
Okay.
wall here.
I was wondering about that, yeah. A long time ago, we were walking up there and we had a metal detector, and I know we're not supposed to do this, but we found a hinge. So there must have been a building there. Maybe it was something to do with the toll road or something too. So there
Could
must
be.
have been a building right by that. So.
Could be, well, I know they had a blacksmith there, so it could have been a
Okay.
blacksmith shop, could have been, anything.
Okay.
But I'm sure the church can tell you more about the Goodings because they're doing a lot of research and trying to honor the
Well,
African
there's some
Americans.
stuff on the internet too. I found some stuff.
There is,
Thank you
yes.
very much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Dobbins.
Yes.
I enjoyed your presentation very much. I was just scrolling on Facebook the other day, and I saw this event here, and piqued my interest because I'm not native from this area. I've been here about 12 years, but ton of family here. It's a long story. So I've been trying to research my roots for so long, and but since I've been here, I've been interested in my own community and trying to dig. And you mentioned that the church that I believe you said went up in 1877, the original.
But it was the association, the Baptist Association.
The Baptist Association. So they were not able to have a cemetery there. So you said you didn't have a cemetery until you got up to Pleasant. I think you call it Pleasant Hill?
No.
Pleasant Valley.
Pleasant Valley, yeah, right next.
Okay, I was wondering if it was associated. I'm a member of Mount Pleasant Baptist right there on like the corner of Annandale and Alexandria, and they have a cemetery, and that church was there since about 1865, 1866.
It's the oldest black church in Fairfax County.
Yes, so we have a ton of history there. I'm also a teacher
Oh.
at Luther Jackson Middle School. So a lot of the things that you were saying kind of piqued my interest. So the Baptist Association,
Which Mount Pleasant is a member of.
it is a member of. And it's just so crazy because, like I said, I'm not a native here. And I just noticed that my church is just associated with, like, I feel like every black Baptist
because
church
of the- because of the
within a
association.
20-mile radius. I'm just like, oh my God, how do we know each other?
It's over 100.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, I'll be shopping at, Lowe's, or I'll go into Harris Teeter and I'll meet someone. And they're like, yeah, I go to so-and-so, and I won't know this person from. And I was like, yeah, I go to Mount Pleasant. And they were like, yeah, I know so-and-so. I'm like, how do everybody know everybody? Literally, it's like everybody's connected and glued together. And so you mentioned the shepherds.
Yes.
And the shepherds are really good dear friends of mine. And the
Paul?
shepherd
From Merrifield.
from Merrifield. They're originally from Arlington, but one of the
His father
ones.
was at Mount Pleasant.
Yes. Well, he used to be the pastor, or I'm not sure. They were associated there, but the shepherds that are still there, they've been there like since Jesus was a baby.
Yeah, absolutely. They flicked the light switch when he said, let there be light.
Absolutely, and it's so connecting because last Sunday, Minister Shepherd brought the word. And I texted her to let her know that I really enjoyed what she brought to the table, and just so connected. So my last question is, I'm sorry, I wrote it down. Y'all give me a second. My memory is not what it used to be. You spoke about how your grandmother was asked to get out, so to speak. And I've read several books since I've been in this area, about 12, 13 years, and that happened a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I read it basically about the African American history. You think about Georgetown. I worked in Arlington for 10 years. I was a teacher there. I just became a teacher in Fairfax County. So I know the history there and where the ballpark is, the Nats ballpark. Mm-hmm. There used to be a Jewish/African American presence in that area. And a lot of times when things went up, a lot of the generational wealth that should be there has been decimated. Yeah. Do you plan on doing an audio book for your book? We need that ASAP.
Oh, I never thought about it, but yes.
Yeah, we do. I'm a big fan of audio books because I have a 4-year-old, so I can wash dishes and do things. How do I go about, last question, how do I go about finding the information that I need to really dig in and research? No, listen, I'm not trying to dig in too far because I have 2 young kids and, life is life, and so I got a busy life. But my dad is 85 and he's one of 15, and I've hired 2 professional history, y'all help me out, the genealogists, thank you, to dig us up, because I don't have the time. And every single time they find the same information I already know. Mm-hmm. They're bumping into walls. And
Are they African American or are they white? Or?
Oh, no, they're not. They're just professionals that I found. Okay.
So they're not connected to your community at all?
No, not at all. They keep bumping into eras. They keep bumping into, I can't go any further than 1862, or I can't find anything beyond 1843. So when you mentioned 1800, it blew my mind because I haven't been able to dig that far back.
If you want, I can give you my telephone number. And
that would be great.
I can talk to you. We can talk about it.
That would be great.
To try to help you.
I want to dig as much as I can.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Dobbins. Just thank you for what you bring to our community.
And just a caveat about Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. It's the oldest Baptist church in Fairfax County. ILDA, most of the members joined Mount Pleasant, except the Johnsons, who went to First Baptist of Merrifield. And before, when James Lee came from Delaplane in near the Middleburgish area and came down here to Falls Church and bought land, which now is the community center, he would walk to Mount Pleasant from Falls Church because there was no Second Baptist. The only church was Mount Pleasant. And so African Americans would all walk to Mount Pleasant.
And if you go through this,
oh yeah, from Bailey's Crossroads. Yeah, yeah. Whites are very prominent in that area.
Thank you.
The last name was White.
I would really like to thank you for coming as our guest of this church, and congratulations on being a teacher.
Yes.
I was one for nearly 30 years in the Mount Vernon area, and that's my question. I'm just wondering, we went last year to, we had a book group here, and we're talking about the ILDA area and so forth. And I'm just wondering if there was any kind of connection, because it's a pretty good distance, down to the Mount Vernon area. I taught down there for 20, 25 years. And are there groups of people that were living there that were connected up here? I'm just wondering what the connection might have been, or if there was one.
Well, the Johnsons who were living, I don't know if it was still considered ILDA when Manassas High School was open. Any black person from Mount Vernon, ILDA, Merrifield, the Pines that was going to a high school would go to that one high school. So they would all be connected that way. But the thing that people don't realize is the African Americans in this area, especially Fairfax County, it is deep. We are 6th, 7th generation. We didn't just come, here 2nd generation, 3rd generation. And most of us are still here. I'm maybe 20 miles from my family. And we all go to the same churches. We've been doing these things. We've been part of the Baptist Association. I mean, there's this solid group. a point is, I was honored by the Honorable Congressman Gerald Conley, God rest his soul. He came to me and he said, I want you to do an oral history project, and I want you to go and talk to as many people as you can in this area who experience segregation, who experienced working for the civil rights movement, who went to the march, who did this and this other. And I said, okay, that's great. I said, you know what, I'm probably gonna know most of the people you're gonna ask me to interview. And he's like, what? I said, yes. They'd come through the door and I'd say, oh, I know you, aren't you? And they'd go, oh yeah, you're your landlord's daughter, yes. They were shocked. And I said, I told you, we're all connected, and we're connected through the church. When people say, how do I find out about African American communities? Well, where's the church? That's what you look for. African American communities always had a church. They had to. That was their saving grace. Not only spiritually, physically, everything. The church was everything. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was interested in the project that you're doing in Burke. Yeah, me, Jane, my husband, we're from the Burke area.
Well, I just really started, and the reason why is because of the Pearson family. And so the Pearson family married into my Collins family. And so I know the Pearsons had land there, and I don't want to really get into the story because I don't want to really tell it wrong until I have all the research, but there was a Pearson who had been enslaved. And her enslaver, when he died, gave her land. And that's sort of like how the Pearsons started. And those Pearsons are part of the Joshua Pearsons that started Merrifield. Chester Pearson, who's on the front of the book, is my uncle. He married into the Collins family. So the Pearsons family is kind of close. I'm trying to really look into that. The other place that's interesting is Willard. If you know where Dulles Airport is, that was an African-American community that was taken just like the Pines, but that was for the airport. But the Pearsons lost their land, a lot of their land in Burke, because that's where they were going to put Dulles Airport originally. But then they said no, and then they went and got Willard. Let's find what other black community we can find. So that's, yeah. But yeah, I have so many other projects.
Anybody else? Yeah, sure.
As you're talking about confiscation of land, I'm reminded one of our members, Gail Perry, made me aware, hey Gail, of a woman's land and house who was being taken in Arlington. So I'm wondering if you can tell us if this is continuing to happen and where that might be, and if there are ways that we can keep that from continuing.
You know, I would assume that it's continuing. I don't have evidence. I've not really researched into the present day of taking land. But the thing is, if the state or the county wants to do something, they have the right with eminent domain, and you have nothing that you can do about it. The only thing you can really do now is make media awareness. TikTok, you know, get it out there in the public and say, look, this is what happened. How can you take this woman's land? How can you do this? And get pressure put on that way. But until they change laws, you know, it's really, they can do whatever they want. And that's, people say, well, why don't you all sue to get your land back? This was in the 60s. Who was going to listen to an African-American community talk about, no, you can't take my land? And even in the 80s, NBC found out about it. They did a whole story on it. And it's still, you know, it costs money to go to get lawyers and try to do these things. So once the land is taken, it's really hard to try to get it back. There was a community in California that got their beach property back. And so that kind of gives me hope that maybe, you know, if any of you all are out there, lawyers would love to work on a project. So. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, great. That's good to know. Okay. That's great to know.
My sisters and I, my sister lives in California, we've been working with them for the past couple of years because we have land in Mississippi that was, my grandparents were murdered, and the 10 children this was during the Great Migration.
Oh, yeah.
The 10 children left and came north, and they ended up all across the country. Yeah.
Yeah.
This
I'd
is
love to
pretty
get that.
common, and based upon my research, if you want to change this, you got to change the law
Right.
and the policies.
Right.
So if you want to do something, get involved in the policy making. You know, get people elected.
You're
Make
right.
sure you vote.
Right.
Make sure you know what you're voting for before, in order to make this go away.
In my book, I have a picture of my father's poll tax that he had to pay to vote, you know. So I tell everybody, you got to vote. And that's why I wanted to do the Civil Rights Archive. It's a 40 oral history documentation, and it's now at George Mason University for the Library of Congress. And these are our elders that are talking about what life was like. I know. That's why we have redundancy and you know, dual copies and, yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Mary, and I was born into this church, so I have the gift and the responsibility that comes with open-mindedness and knowing in different walks, I guess. So I just want to thank you for
welcome.
sharing the story, the narrative, and express the value that I place and that I think is so necessary in making our country beautiful, to know the stories, the surge of narratives, or at least the feeling of the surge of narratives since before the pandemic, through the pandemic, the different voices is so important. And so also sharing that I gain strength hearing the narratives of those who have lived with resilience and continue. So thank you again for being here.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name's Laura,
Hi,
and I
Laura.
live in Vienna. And my daughter went to Louise Archer Elementary School in Vienna. And Vienna, you know, is right next door to Dunloring. So when you're talking about African Americans and their families and where they originated, where they started living, is there, I mean, Vienna is just so close to Dunloring. Are there families that are connected from Dunloring to Vienna?
There are. I mean, Dunlorin has families that were connected with Lanham House in Fairfax, the Seals that were enslaved. So Joshua Ball was married into that family. So there are. There again, it's the church. You've got First Baptist Vienna, which I think was built in maybe, it was after Mount Pleasant. But there again, it's a hub of the black community. So it's through that church that the communities are connected. I do know, you know, Vienna, the city of Vienna had some very hard covenants where you could not rent or sell to African Americans well into the 70s.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
You're an incredible storyteller.
Thank you.
Have you been approached or have you spoken at the National Museum of African American History and Culture?
I have not, but my PhD mentor is Dr. Spencer Crew, who, do you know? He helped create many of the exhibits there, and he's my mentor and advisor for the program that I'm in.
Would love to see you there.
Put a word in, anybody that knows him.
Okay, will do.
I don't know why he hasn't asked me. I'm gonna have to ask him why. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
He and I grew up in the same neighborhood.
In Ohio.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I know Spencer.
He is such a humble man.
Absolutely.
Oh my God. He is, you see Henry Gates all the time on TV. Spencer Crew runs circles around him, and he is so humble. We would not have that museum without him, Lonnie Bunch, and Rex Ellis. Those are the three top people that got that museum going. It's amazing.
Okay,
What's your name?
Oh,
Gail Perry. I'll tell him.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. And again, Marion, we thank you as well for telling us this important story. I just wanted to put in a little plug for what the anti-racism ministry team has been up to this year, and with an invitation, if any of you would be interested in attending other events like this. There was a sign-in sheet when you came in, and if you hadn't given us your contact info, please do, and we'll be glad to let you know about future events. We started out this year with a workshop on microaggression, how to identify it in yourself, in others, and how to respond. We celebrated Martin Luther King in worship in January. We had a Juneteenth worship the Sunday before June 19th, where we celebrated the strides that the country has made in terms of advocating for justice and fairness, lamenting where we've lost our way, and in renewing our commitment to the challenges that lie ahead. And then on June 19th, we gathered just out here on the driveway where the enslaved people who were a part of the Gooding community, the enslaved people, some of them are buried, and remembered them, honored them, and then went out to the turnpike with signs and banners and lots of horns honking to celebrate the day. Christian education, adult Christian education has increased over this year, and after Easter, the anti-racism team was a part of an educational event focusing first on the contributions of the Afro-Christian churches of the United Church of Christ in helping us understand their legacy and the contributions that they've made to the fabric of life in the United Church of Christ, past, present, and future. And then we've been reading a series of essays by people like W.E. Du Bois, James Baldwin, Bell Hooks, Jesmond Ward, and Nicole Cameron. And this fall, we're going to be working on creating a memorial to honor the enslaved people on the property that the churches own, as well as planning some other events. So if you'd like to hear about those as they're developed and we begin to publicize it, we'll be happy to let you know. Again, Marion, thank you so much for enlightening us. Oh, yes, and she has books for sale. And just outside where you signed in is where Marion will be. You can buy copies of this wonderful book, and you can get it autographed. So we'll thank you again for your presence. Have a blessed rest of this day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much.